They called them the Aari, a soft-spoken race with translucent skin, wide, sorrowful eyes, and voices that hummed like music. Once cherished for their peaceful wisdom, they'd become galactic relics after the war ended. No more trade agreements, no more seats in councils, no more help when their worlds turned cold and silent. The Galactic Union had decided they were a burden, not useful in war, not profitable in peace. The last transmission from the Central Core broadcasted it like an afterthought. All aid to peripheral races hereby suspended. Non-compliance will result in sanction. The message was cold, mechanical. It hit every comm line like a knife in the gut. For most, the Aari were just another footnote in history. But not for us, not for humans. I still remember the day I met the first one. I was stationed on Iridian 4, a mining outpost that scraped the crust of a dead world for energy cores. I'd done 3 tours in the expansion wars and 2 in the pirate containment zones. I wasn't a hero, just a man who'd seen too much and still didn't know how to quit. The Aari stumbled in during a dust storm. 3 of them, barely clothed, barely breathing. One of them carried a youngling wrapped in torn, woven silk, her skin glowing faintly like dying embers. The others collapsed at our gate, too weak to speak. I remember looking at the outpost commander, expecting him to bark orders, get medics, something, but he just turned his back. "They're not our problem," he muttered. "We've got quotas to fill." I wanted to believe I misunderstood. I waited. No orders came. No one moved. The men looked down at their boots, pretending they didn't hear the quiet coughs of the child or the ragged breaths of the old one whose bones were showing through his skin. So I did what any man with blood still warm in his veins would do. I stepped forward, grabbed the first aid kit, and opened the gates. The others watched me like I was insane. "You'll get court-martialed," one muttered. I didn't answer. I just knelt beside the old Aari and gave him water. His hands shook like brittle leaves as he drank, and when he looked at me, I saw it in his eyes, relief and disbelief woven together. They weren't supposed to survive. Not anymore. We set them up in the south sector of the outpost, where unused supply crates made a half-decent shelter. I fed them out of my rations and taught one of the young ones how to work the purifier. They didn't speak much, but they listened. They worked quietly. They kept to themselves. Word spread fast, though. Whispers turned into complaints. The mining overseer sent a drone to document the violation. Then came the official threat from Union Command. Cease unauthorized contact with decommissioned species or face asset forfeiture. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about helping a few refugees. This was bigger. This was about a galaxy that forgot what mercy looked like, and a species like ours that still remembered. The next week, 3 more Aari showed up. Then 5, then dozens. They were coming from the frost zones, the acid fields, anywhere that hadn't killed them yet. They came because they'd heard that humans, monkeys with guns and scars, were doing what the most advanced civilizations refused to do. We sheltered them, taught them, defied orders. But we also knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. They'd come for us. And when they did, they'd learn that the galaxy's mistake wasn't forgetting the Aari. It was underestimating humanity's wrath when you try to crush the ones we protect. We were outlaws now. That's what the official logs would eventually say. Unauthorized aid rendered to non-sanctioned alien life forms, defiance of central protocol, hostile harboring of invalidated species. Those were their words, cold, measured, distant. But the truth? We were just men and women who couldn't watch someone die on our doorstep and pretend it wasn't our business. They started monitoring us first. The satellites above Iridian 4 blinked back to life after years of silence, their long, dormant sensors aimed at the outpost. At night, when the storm winds died down, you could see the faint blue flickers in the sky like electronic stars watching us. We weren't stupid. We knew surveillance when we saw it. The Union didn't bomb first. They isolated, froze supply chains. Our monthly shipments from the core stopped arriving. Fuel barrels ran dry. We had to cut power rotations, prioritize the water purifiers and medbay. Even then, we held the line. By now there were over 100 Aari in our sector, fragile, graceful beings that moved like they were part of the wind, not of the ground. They were quiet, reserved, but not helpless. They began working beside us, repairing scrap, filtering water, tending to the wounded. They weren't lazy. They weren't weak. They were survivors of betrayal, and they trusted us with what little they had left. One of them, a young male with bright silver veins under his skin, started following me during daily inspections. I asked his name once, and he just shook his head slowly. Names, he said, were things of the past. What mattered now was breadth, not title. He called himself Kira, which roughly translated to Last Ember. Fitting. Kira never spoke much unless he had something worth saying, but when he did, I listened. He'd point out fractures in the ground near our southern fuel tanks, warn us when a dust storm was forming beyond the ridge before our sensors even blinked. The Aari were attuned to things we weren't. He became my shadow, my advisor, maybe even something closer than that. Not a friend, not a soldier, a witness. They needed a place to rebuild. We needed a reason to fight again. The men on my crew, Vance, Duro, Barrett, Cole, weren't saints. They were tired ex-soldiers, busted miners, men with pasts they didn't talk about. But none of them turned their backs. They stood with me, with the Aari, because deep down they knew the Union didn't care about us either. We were all disposable, just like the ones we were protecting. Then came the drone. Not the passive recon bots. They'd been watching us for weeks. This one was heavier, sleeker, painted in Union matte black, bearing the insignia of the Enforcement Guild. It hovered in low, its anti-grav hum shaking the bunkers. The thing wasn't here to observe. It was here to intimidate. I stood outside the gates with my rifle slung across my shoulder, staring it down. "Outpost 17A," came the voice, robotic but with that smug tilt only a Union AI could produce. "You are in violation of Intergalactic Ordinance 342B. Surrender unauthorized lifeforms for extraction or face tactical intervention." Kira stood behind me, silent. I didn't blink. "We've got civilians here, starving, sick. If you want them, come down and drag them yourselves." The drone paused for a long second. Then it ascended, turned, and vanished beyond the ridge. That silence afterward was heavier than any explosion. They were testing us, measuring how far we'd go, how long before we bent. We didn't. That night we fortified the outpost, welded scrap into barricades, rewired the old turrets no one thought would ever fire again. The Aari helped too, not just with hands but with knowledge. They remembered things the galaxy forgot, how to weave light into shields, how to redirect power through natural channels in the stone. Together we turned a mining outpost into a fortress. Then, 2 nights later, it happened. A transport ship crash-landed 3 clicks north of our base. I saw it coming through my old scope, its engines on fire, its wings clipped. It slammed into the blackened earth and tore through a dust ridge like a knife through silk. We mounted up and rode out with 3 bikes and a crawler. What we found changed everything. The ship wasn't Union. It was Aari, a long-forgotten model, scorched and battered, with hull markings faded by time. Inside were 30 more Aari, half of them unconscious. The others, starving, hunted. There were plasma scorch marks on the walls, signs of a fight. Someone had tried to stop them from escaping. They came from a planet we didn't know about, one the Union had kept off the charts. A place where the remaining Aari were being contained, their word for internment. "Containment centers," Kira whispered as he walked through the ruined transport, fingers tracing the cracks. "They promised us safety. All they gave us was rot." He turned to me, and for the first time, I saw fire in those soft eyes. "They need to be freed." The words hit like a charge detonating in my chest. I didn't say yes. I didn't need to, because somewhere deep in my bones I already knew. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was a rebellion. We weren't protecting a race. We were dragging them back into existence, kicking and screaming if we had to. When we brought them back to the outpost, the others didn't question it. They just made space, shared food, helped rebuild. That's the thing about humans. We're bastards, sure. Violent, loud, flawed to the core. But when we decide someone's part of our tribe, we go to war for them. And the war was coming. We intercepted a signal a few days later. The Union was mobilizing. A cruiser-class vessel had been rerouted to neutralize escalating non-compliance on Iridian 4. That was their way of saying, "Burn it all down." I gathered my crew in the comms room, eyes scanning every scarred face. Vance had one arm from an old mech explosion. Duro was missing 2 fingers. Barrett had burn marks across his throat. Cole had a glass eye. These weren't men built for speeches, but I spoke anyway. "They're coming to erase us. Not just the Aari, United States, because we made a choice they didn't like. You don't have to stay." No one moved. Barrett spat in a corner and grinned. "I never liked Union food anyway." Cole tapped his rifle. "They come, they bleed." Vance gave me a thumbs up with his one good arm, and Duro, always quiet, just nodded once. That was enough. We had 3 days until the cruiser dropped into orbit. 3 days to prepare. 3 days to remind the galaxy what it means to stand your ground, even when every star above you says, "You've already lost." There's a kind of silence that falls before a battle. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that hums behind your ears, makes your skin itch, and stretches every second like wire ready to snap. That's what we felt as the cruiser loomed closer. The stars looked the same, but we weren't. Not anymore. The Union named it Aegis Class, a warship designed for intimidation more than invasion. Its purpose was simple: arrive, send a message, crush any resistance before it became a symbol. We'd seen this pattern before, back when colonies first started defying mining taxes. The Aegis didn't ask questions. It made examples. We weren't going to be one. Our defenses weren't high-tech. They were patchwork, rugged, held together with scrap, hope, and human stubbornness. We had pulse turrets wired through salvaged cargo ships, old EMP mines buried in the perimeter, and 4 reprogrammed diggerbots rigged to blow if anything breached the outer wall. The Aari worked with us every hour. Their hands might have looked delicate, but their minds were sharp. They reinforced our shields with something we didn't understand. Light bonding, they called it. Using energy flows from natural minerals buried beneath the outpost. The walls didn't just block. They bent incoming signals, jammed scanners. That gave us a ghost's chance. Inside, we converted the old medbay into a triage center. Kira took charge of the injured. His quiet authority calmed the younger Aari, who were too scared to sleep. He barely rested himself. I caught him once, standing alone in the observation deck, looking up at the stars with a look I couldn't read. "You're thinking of them," I said, stepping beside him. He didn't turn. "They will not just bomb us. They will show the rest of the galaxy what happens when a forgotten species dares to rise again." I nodded. "And we'll show them what happens when you try to erase what's still breathing." He glanced at me then. You do not have to die for us." "We're not dying," I said. "We're living the only way that matters. Standing up." The next morning, we picked up the cruiser's approach vector. High orbit, steady path. ETA, 17 hours. I gathered the crew and anyone strong enough to fight. 32 humans, maybe 50 Aari capable of holding weapons or manning stations. Some had never held a rifle before. Some could barely stand. But they stood anyway. I didn't give a rousing speech. That's not what men like us needed. Instead, I spoke truth. "They'll hit us hard. First from above, then they'll land. They expect us to break early, to surrender. Maybe even beg. We don't, we hold. Every minute we last sends a message." Barrett cracked his knuckles. "Let's give them a novel." That drew a few smirks. Even Kira managed a faint smile. We split into squads. Vance took the south wall. Duro and Cole manned the turrets. Barrett coordinated the mines. I stayed center. If the line broke, I'd be the first they saw. That's how I wanted it. Then came the message, broadcast straight from the Aegis. "This is Commander Luthen of the Galactic Union. You are harboring non-sanctioned biologicals. You have 15 minutes to comply. Failure to surrender will result in orbital action." I stepped into the comms chamber, looked straight into the feed lens. "This is Captain Rain, former Union infantry. We're not harboring anyone. We're living, breathing, surviving. If that's a crime, come down here and explain it to our faces." The comms cut. 12 minutes later, the first strike hit. A kinetic rod, not plasma, non-lethal by Union standards, meant to break infrastructure, not people. It crushed our northern watchtower and split the barracks roof. Dust filled the sky. Sirens screamed. But no one ran. We scrambled, repaired, dug out survivors. Second strike hit the old fuel depot. Fire burst through the sky. Cole barely got out in time. His right leg scorched, face blackened. He refused evac, propped himself against the turret console and kept targeting. That's how we fought. Injured, outnumbered, breathing grit and fury. They sent a ground squad next. Sleek drop pods fell like silver needles through the sky. 8 landed in a wide arc. Union troopers, perfect armor, synchronized movement, soulless. But they didn't expect the dust storm. They didn't expect EMP mines rigged inside the dunes. And they sure as hell didn't expect Aari light traps that turned our terrain into a shifting illusion. We picked them off, one by one. I killed 3 myself, close range. Face to face. I saw the confusion in their eyes, saw them realize we weren't the desperate fools they thought we were. We were men with nothing left to lose, and that made us monsters they couldn't predict. An hour passed, then 2. They lost over 20 troopers trying to breach the east side. The Aegis shifted tactics. Plasma this time. They dropped a blast on our generator zone, taking out half the eastern shield. Fires erupted. Debris rained. Barrett went down, shrapnel through the chest. I held his hand as he coughed blood. "Don't let those bastards rewrite this," he rasped. "Make them remember." I promised him I would. His pulse faded before the fire did. Kira arrived minutes later, skin dim, lips cracked. "They're scanning again, preparing another drop, but not soldiers. Something worse." "What worse?" I asked. "Cleansers." I froze. The Union only used cleansers for one thing: annihilation. If they dropped those, we'd be ash in minutes. That was their final move. No survivors, no evidence. Just another empty outpost they'd say was abandoned. History would forget us. Unless someone made sure it didn't. I went back to the comms, recorded a full vid log, detailed everything: the attacks, the cruelty, the refusal to let innocent beings live. I coded it, tagged it with a pulse beacon, and launched it into orbit. The message would reach the outer systems. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But someone would hear. We weren't going to vanish quietly. Then came the roar, not from the sky, but the ground. The light-bonded shields the Aari built suddenly flared brighter than we'd ever seen. The ground pulsed, the wind screamed. Kira turned to me. We opened the core veins. It's a last resort. It will kill the land for years, but it will block their drop. The blast wave that followed knocked everything sideways. The cleansers, still mid-descent, hit the energy wave like birds slamming into glass. Explosions filled the air. The sky cracked with fire. We lost 4 more men in the collapse. But we held. We held through the night. We held as the Aegis lost its will. And then, silence. By morning, they were gone. Just like that. They didn't send another message. Didn't return. They left us broken, bleeding, smoldering. But alive. The Aari lit blue fires for the dead, our dead. They sang soft songs that shook the walls with their sadness. We didn't understand the words, but we felt them. We stood among the wreckage. Fewer than before, but not alone. The Union thought they could erase a race. Instead, they gave it warriors. They gave it allies. They gave it us. The smoke hadn't cleared. It never does. Not really. It hangs in your throat, under your skin, in the quiet between each breath. Some battles are loud. Others keep screaming long after the noise is gone. Iridian 4 was the latter. We buried the dead at dawn. No flags, no ceremony. Just names when we had them. Scratched into rusted steel plates or carved into scorched rock. Barrett, Cole, Trina from the comms team. Duro, who had dragged 2 Aari kids out of a burning shelter before the roof collapsed on him. Kira stood with me the entire time. His kind didn't believe in burial. Energy returns to energy, he'd once said. But he honored our way, watched us dig with cracked hands and tired shoulders. When we finished, the wind picked up. Not harsh like before, gentler, almost respectful. Kira hummed something low and mournful, and soon the others joined in. The Aari voice didn't just echo, it layered, like light bending through glass. Each tone wove into the next until the very air felt heavy with grief. Vance placed his hand on my shoulder when the last of the ashes were scattered. They didn't break us, he muttered. No, I said. But they'll try again. And we both knew it. The Union might have pulled back, but that was a tactical retreat, not surrender. They'd underestimated us once. They wouldn't make the same mistake twice. The next time it wouldn't be a cruiser. It would be a fleet. Unless we changed the rules. 2 days later, a ship arrived. Not Union, not hostile. It was civilian class, modified for stealth and long range. Old markings from a forgotten Earth colony. It landed just beyond the ridge, its hull blackened by re-entry burns. I approached with my rifle drawn, Kira at my side. The ramp lowered slowly. Out walked a woman, mid-30s, scarring down her jawline, coat made of salvaged synth leather and a dozen pockets. She looked human, but her eyes were cyber-enhanced. Tracker grade. She raised her hands. I'm not with them. Who are you with? I asked. Anyone who still gives a damn, she said. Name's Corin. I picked up your beacon. That message I'd sent? It worked. She wasn't alone. Her ship held medical supplies, food rations, weapons, nothing fancy, but it meant hope. She'd been running outer system routes for years, working off the grid, smugglers, medics, defectors, people who knew how to hide, fight, or both. You made a hell of a statement, she said, scanning the wreckage. Union won't let this slide. Good, I said. Let them come, but we won't be here. She raised a brow. You're leaving? I looked out over the remains of the outpost, the broken towers, the cracked shields, the mass graves. This place is proof, I said, but it's also a graveyard. If we stay, we die here when they return. But if we move, if we spread, we become a movement. That night, I called a council. Humans and Aari alike gathered in the central dome, sitting on crates, floor panels, pieces of welded scrap. No thrones, no speeches, just the truth. We can't win if we stay small, I began. The Union owns the stars because no one dares to take them back. But they forgot one thing. Humanity was made to adapt. We don't just survive. We spread, we resist. And now, we're not alone. I turned to Kira, who stood without hesitation. We do not seek revenge, he said. We seek presence, we seek remembrance, and for that, we need voices louder than silence. Corin stood next. I've got contacts, outposts, pirate groups, dissidents. The galaxy's full of people who've been steamrolled by Union boots. You give them a story, one where humans bled for someone else, and they'll listen. The room pulsed with tension and resolve. We agreed on the plan before the sun rose again. We would leave Iridian 4. We would scatter across trade routes, mining colonies, even inner ring slums. We'd spread the story of what we did, of what the Union did, of what was coming. We called ourselves the Ember Line. Not soldiers, not heroes, just a fuse waiting to be lit. Over the next 10 days, Corin helped retrofit 2 old transport freighters. Kira and a few of his brightest designed cloaking mods from leftover Union drone tech. We reprogrammed satellite beacons to echo fake signals, creating the illusion of a still active base. If the Union scanned from orbit, they'd think we were still here. We weren't. We slipped away under cover of night. One ship carried wounded and younglings, headed toward an unmarked moon system in the Eros belt. The other carried fighters, messengers, and me. We weren't running. We were planting seeds. The first stop was a fuel port in the Gultar sector, run by old traders and mercenaries, lawless but not heartless. We offered information, proof, footage from the battle, names of the fallen. They didn't pledge allegiance, but they let us talk. And word spread. Then came the second port. Then a listening post. Then a smuggler's den. The story became more than ours. It became fuel for others. Humans who'd been stripped of rights, alien species forced into Union compliance, fringe worlds choked by taxation and forgotten by aid. Whispers turned to echoes, echoes to voices. And suddenly, the Union had a new problem. It wasn't just resistance, it was unity, all sparked by a handful of men who refused to let a peaceful race die in silence. But with growth came risk. 2 weeks after we left Iridian 4, one of our allied ships was intercepted, a freighter named Libra 9. It carried 6 Aari, 3 humans, and 1 pregnant technician who'd defected from a Union data core. They didn't even get a warning shot. The Union vaporized them in orbit. No trial, no broadcast, no reason. That night, I sat alone in the ship's engine bay, staring at the names on our growing memorial list. Corin found me there. "They're going to escalate," she said. "Fast! You scared them." "Good," I whispered. "Let them come." She leaned beside me. "We need to strike first." I didn't reply at first. Then I stood. Number we strike last. She raised a brow. "You want them to keep hitting us?" "I want them to think they're winning." Her eyes narrowed, but a smirk formed. "You're going to make them bleed the long way." "No," I said, turning toward the war table we'd built from old cargo crates. "I'm going to make them watch as the galaxy decides it doesn't need them anymore." The real war wasn't about weapons or ships. It was about the story. And now the galaxy had one worth telling. Every system has cracks. Every empire, every machine, every polished lie they try to sell you. You just have to find the fracture lines and push until the whole thing comes down. That's what we were doing. Bit by bit, strike by strike. The Union still controlled the comms relays, the major ports, the fleet paths. But we had the one thing they didn't: belief. People were starting to whisper our name across the trade lanes, the Ember Line. We became something more than survivors. We became a question. What if the Union wasn't inevitable? What if they could bleed? We hit a relay station on Rithus Prime, a quiet, icy moon used for logistics and resupply. Barely guarded, a perfect first real strike. Vance led the infiltration squad. Kira stayed on the main ship, coordinating feeds. I was on overwatch with Corin, eyes on the ridge. We disabled the station's backup shield generator, jammed their external distress pings, and walked right in under a falsified cargo tag. 3 minutes of silence. Then 3 shots. By the time we breached the command chamber, the Union crew had already surrendered. We didn't kill them. That was important. That was the real victory, not the data we stole, not the explosives we planted, but the proof that the Union could be beaten without becoming like them. We left the crew tied, unharmed, with a medical kit and a message scratched into the wall in both Union Common and Aari script. You forgot us. We remembered each other. Corin said it was risky. People want fire rain. They want explosions, ships burning in the sky. No, I said. They want to believe there's still a better way. But the Union wasn't interested in better ways. Days after the Rithus raid, they launched Operation Scorch Veil. We didn't know what it was at first, just intercepted fragments. But when the reports came in, my blood went cold. They were hitting Aari refuge zones, not bases, not military sites, villages, places where old Aari went to die quietly, far from conflict. The first was called Elvaran, a name that meant quiet waters in their tongue. It was built around a natural spring, half hidden by cave systems, shielded only by weak signal dampeners and topography. The Union glassed it, burned every tree, melted the stone, turned centuries of peace into radioactive dust. They didn't broadcast the strike. They didn't admit it. But the galaxy knew, because we made sure they did. Kira watched the footage in silence. His skin lost its glow. I stood behind him, fists clenched, rage chewing through my ribs. They want us to strike back hard, I said. They want blood, justification. Kira nodded once. Then we must give them memory, not rage. Let them drown in what they fear most. Truth they can't erase. We began compiling the archives. Names, dates, images, testimony. Survivors from Elvaran gave their stories to Corin's crew. Children with radiation burns. Priests who'd buried relics under ash. Elders who could barely speak but still lifted their heads for the camera and said, "We remember." It hit harder than any missile. Soon, other races started reaching out. Not many, but enough to shift the tide. A Plaxian captain from the Outlands offered us stealth tech. A Myran engineer shared shield bypassing schematics. Even a Union comms officer defected and handed us encryption logs before he vanished. But nothing shook the Union like what came next. It was an old broadcast file, tucked inside a restricted archive. Vance's hacker crew decrypted it after 10 days of sweat and coffee. The file was a recording, 20 years old. A Union Council session, one nobody was ever meant to see. It showed a vote on Aari protection. The vote failed, not because of legal loopholes, not because of pressure. Because of greed, they'd known the Aari worlds were rich in phase core minerals. but the Aari refused to mine. They called it Soul Stone, said removing it killed the land's spirit. The Union didn't care. They declared the Aari passive liabilities. Then they let them die. That file, it was dynamite. We didn't leak it yet. We weren't ready. But knowing what they did, how deliberate it was, changed something in me. It wasn't just politics or survival anymore. It was personal. They didn't forget the Aari. They sacrificed them. And now they were trying to do it again. We needed a bigger strike, not to kill, but to expose. So we set our sights on Zerion Spire, a Union relay tower that connected half the outer systems, heavily fortified, guarded by 2 Aegis-class cruisers, stacked with live broadcasts and storage cores. It was suicide, unless we turned it into a signal flare. We wouldn't destroy it. We'd take it. We'd hijack the broadcast feed and stream the Elvaran massacre file, the council vote, the names of every Aari village burned by the Union's hand. We'd make the stars watch. I presented the plan to the team. Corin stared at the schematics for 10 minutes before she finally said, "You know if this works, they'll send the entire damn fleet after us." "They're already coming," I said. "Let's give them a reason to run." Kira stepped forward. "I will lead the ground breach." "No," I said. "You're too valuable. My people must see me stand." Vance clapped his shoulder. "Then we go together." There was no more debate. The Ember Line would hit Zerion in 3 days. And if we fell, we'd fall loud enough for the whole galaxy to remember. Zerion Spire. It rose like a blade from the skin of the moon Trask 7, cold, black, angular, and mean. 75 stories tall, home to thousands of Union personnel, communication hub for half the outer systems. More than just a tower. It was a symbol. They never expected anyone to come for it. Why would they? It was suicide to even approach. Twin Aegis-class cruisers floated above in low-orbit standby. Ground defenses boasted 10 rotating turrets, 8 railgun stations, and a shockwave perimeter that would melt any unauthorized craft before it landed. But we weren't coming to knock. We were coming to take it. Our plan was madness. Just the way the Union liked to pretend no one thought. But it was designed that way, because madness is unpredictable. Unpredictable keeps you alive. We launched with 3 ships. One carried the boarding team, my squad, Kira's Aari fighters, Vance, Corin, and a few techs. The second ship was Decoy, rigged with active heat signatures and Union transponder codes we'd stolen. It drew the cruisers off long enough for our breaching pod to slip under their scanning net. The third ship, loaded with data packets, hung in low orbit. Its job, go live with the truth if we succeeded, or scatter our last message across the stars if we didn't. As we slammed through Zerion's lower stratosphere, the clouds broke open like torn canvas. Anti-air fire lit the sky. The whole tower glowed red with activation signals. We were a ghost in a firestorm. Our breaching pod hit level 14. Steel screamed. Doors blew open, and we were inside. The shock was on our side. Half the guards didn't know whether we were pirates, mercs, or something worse. But by the time they figured it out, we were already clearing corridors. Vance laid down suppressing fire. Kira moved like lightning, disabling targets with grace and precision. The Aari fighters behind him weren't warriors by nature, but desperation has a way of awakening old instincts. They fought like their history depended on it, because it did. Corin and the techs peeled off near the core elevator. Their job? Slice into the broadcast chamber on level 62. Our job? Keep them alive long enough to make it there. We split into strike cells. My group pushed north toward the central server banks. That's where the control relay was, our kill switch if they tried to block the stream. Vance took the east corridor to secure power flow. We had 12 minutes before reinforcements regrouped. 12 minutes to take down a structure that had stood untouched for decades. I cleared the third corridor, rifle tight in my hands, moving from cover to cover. We passed labs, offices, dead hallways filled with flickering lights and toppled chairs. Most of the staff had already locked down or fled. But one room stopped me cold. It was filled with Aari, or what was left of them. Tubes, wires, feeding systems, data nodes. They were studying them, cloning, harvesting, experimenting on a species they claimed no longer mattered. One still breathing because we dared to protect them. Kira entered behind me. He didn't speak. He just looked, and I saw something break inside him. "They lied about mercy," he whispered. "We expose this too," I said. "Every second of it." He stepped forward, deactivated the control pads, and said a prayer under his breath. The remaining Aari, weak and dazed, looked at him with wide, flickering eyes. He looked back and promised, "You are not forgotten." Then the alarms shifted. Not security, military-grade override. The cruisers were returning. Corin's voice crackled through my comms. 5 minutes. We're in the chamber. Uploading files now. Status? Rough, defensive grid came online. We're pinned behind the primary wall. If we don't reroute power, the signal dies before it reaches sector relays. I turned to my tech, an old slicer named Kaelric. Grimy hands, synthetic eye, attitude like vinegar. "You heard her," I said. "Find me a reroute." He grinned, pulled out his tools. "Buy me 3 minutes, and a miracle." We gave him 5. Downstairs, the guards regrouped and charged. We held the hallway. Me, Vance, 2 Aari fighters, one of whom was already limping from a leg wound. Gunfire turned the walls to slag. The air reeked of plasma and blood. I dropped 3 troopers before they reached the second column. Vance took out 2 more with a shoulder launcher. Then came the grenade. It hit the wall, bounced once, and exploded. I woke up to silence, ears ringing, vision blurred. Vance was down. I crawled to him. Blood soaked his side. His eyes fluttered open. "Is it done?" "Not yet," I said. "Then don't stay here." He shoved something into my hand. A detonation trigger. "The hallway's lost. Seal it. Get them out." "Not without you." He gave me the look I knew too well. "Do it." I held his hand for half a second longer. Then I ran. Kira's squad was pushing toward the upper lifts. We barely made it through before the first shockwave hit. The hallway collapsed behind us, cutting off the lower floors. Vance gave us a corridor of silence. Corin's voice hit again. "Stream is live. Data file 1 complete. We need you at the main relay. Manually override transmission lock. 30 seconds or we lose it." We reached the broadcast center just as the cruisers locked target. Through the glass dome, I saw the sky fill with light. But it wasn't death. Not yet. The third ship, the one we left in orbit, had released its decoys. Mini-drones, hundreds of them, each carrying segments of our signal, streaming, bouncing, echoing across star lines. Even if they destroyed the tower, they couldn't stop the message now. Kira reached the override panel, hands moving with sharp precision. The lights flickered, then stabilized. On every screen in the room, and soon, across the outer systems, appeared the face of an Aari elder, her eyes hollow, her voice breaking. She spoke of Elvaran, of the vote, of betrayal. Then came the footage, Union cruisers burning green forests, children crying beside craters, soldiers laughing as they walked away. Then came the file, names, ranks, timestamps. Proof. Every detail broadcast in 12 languages, to every world that still had ears. And just like that, Zerion Spire didn't belong to the Union anymore. It belonged to history. We didn't stay, couldn't. We exfiltrated through the upper maintenance shaft, dropped into the undercanals, and vanished into the drainage systems. The entire upper deck blew 10 minutes later, courtesy of Corrin's backdoor protocol. Just enough fire to convince the Union we'd been vaporized. We weren't. We were already gone. The Ember Line lived. There's a strange silence that comes after a storm, a kind of stillness that hums with unfinished violence. We felt that in the days after Zerion Spire fell. Not peace, not relief, just the tension of waiting for the hammer to come down. But first, we got to see what truth actually did. The footage we released didn't just go viral, it went viral across species. Smugglers shared it in backwater cantinas. Old rebel groups posted it on shadow networks. Even neutral civilizations that never spoke out began issuing public concerns. The Union tried to smother it, of course, broadcast denials, propaganda reels. They accused us of fabrication, terrorism, manipulation. But it was too late. The Aari weren't ghosts anymore. They had a voice. And that voice now echoed from asteroid colonies to inner ring stations. Some places held rallies. Others began open debates. Most just watched and listened. But the real change came where we least expected it, inside the Union. The first crack showed up in a military data center on Arcus 9. A junior analyst leaked internal memos that confirmed everything we'd posted, down to the names and voting logs. His name was Linarth, half human, half Varnid, a quiet kid who'd only joined for education credits. They arrested him within the hour, but not before his message went out. They taught us loyalty. They didn't tell us it meant burying the innocent. A day later, 3 more defectors followed. 2 pilots, 1 logistics officer. They handed over ship paths, access codes, strategic weaknesses. It was happening. The Union wasn't losing a war. They were losing control of their own people. Still, no one dared strike them directly. Not yet. Except us. Corrin and I regrouped with the others on a deep space outpost known as Echo Rift, an old trade station built into the skeleton of a mined-out moon. Lawless territory. No official allegiances. Just traders, hackers, mercs, and people too burned by the Union to ever forget. It became our new hub. Kira called it the Ember's Route. From there we coordinated smaller missions, relay takeovers, smuggling supply chains to Aari survivors, linking human and non-human fringe worlds into a single encrypted network. We didn't call it a rebellion. That word was too small. This was a correction, but the Union wasn't idle. They launched Operation Purity. Publicly, it was about stabilization. In reality, it was a series of scorched earth strikes. They didn't target armies. They targeted sympathy, outposts that gave us shelter, civilian ships that refused to report us, even neutral trade stations caught broadcasting our footage. They called them co-conspirators. They erased them. I remember reading the casualty list for one of the moons, Jaxa Theta. 1,200 lives. Gone. No warning. No survivors. Kira sat beside me when I saw it, his face blank, his voice flat. They are trying to make silence louder than truth. I nodded slowly. Then we make the silence scream. That's when we changed tactics. We weren't just sharing information anymore. We were organizing. Not like an army, but like a virus, spread thin, fast, adaptive. Each Emberline cell operated independently, connected only by encrypted drops and agreed-upon signs. No command chain, no base to destroy. We were an idea. And ideas don't burn. Some of the newer cells had no humans in them at all, just Aari fighters trained by our veterans. Some were run by rogue AI who joined the cause after their creators were executed for treason. We even got word that a few Union ships had started going dark, refusing orders, drifting into the void, waiting for a sign. One came 2 weeks later. A communications relay in the Zetran belt was hijacked, not by us, but by Union defectors. They broadcast one sentence, again and again. "We served your silence, now we serve the truth." It echoed across 100 systems, and the Union panicked. They declared martial law across 5 sectors, deployed new suppression ships, faster, more brutal. They labeled the Ember Line an intergalactic terrorist contagion. That last word stuck with me. Contagion. They finally understood. We weren't just a rebellion. We were infection, of memory, of guilt, of justice. The galaxy was waking up, and even if they crushed every cell we had, they couldn't unsee what we'd shown them. The first system to fall wasn't one of ours. It was Ulrich's II, a mid-tier Union-controlled colony on the edge of the trade spine. They had factories, drones, a garrison, a rigid command structure. For years, the people there obeyed every law, paid every tariff, kept their heads down while others burned, until one day, they stopped. Not because someone invaded, but because they finally saw. The Ember Line footage had been circling in their net streams for weeks. Most didn't believe it, or didn't want to. But when a defecting courier pilot landed there, bloodied, coughing, half-starved, and handed a priest the full vote file and the biological labs data from Zerion Spire, something shifted. The priest didn't broadcast it. He read it to his congregation, every word. Then he lit the Union flag and hung the Aari crest, reborn from ancient designs, over the city square. The garrison panicked, called for support. But the citizens surrounded them, and when Union reinforcements arrived, the troops refused to fire. Just like that, Ulrich's II slipped out of the Union's grip like water through cracked stone. It wasn't ours, not officially, but it became part of us. They raised the Ember Line sigil beside their new banners, orange flame twisting into a silver breath, symbolizing unity forged through fire. That event changed everything. We weren't fringe anymore. We were visible. The Union began deploying voice control units, black-shielded vessels broadcasting heavy-wave propaganda. They flooded civilian nets with footage of human traitors, twisted versions of Kira's voice, and deepfakes of our dead. One of them aired a fake recording of me surrendering. "I regret my actions," the video said in my voice. "The Aari lied. I was deceived. I beg for Union mercy." I watched it play across 3 news feeds while hiding in a cargo bay on Othas 9. Vance would have laughed himself to death. Kira didn't laugh. He just said, "They wouldn't lie if they weren't afraid." Still, that moment hit hard, because it meant one thing. The Union no longer saw us as a pest. They saw us as a threat, and when an empire feels threatened, it does what it always does. It kills louder. 3 refugee stations were destroyed in the next 8 days. Whole systems blacked out. Data centers scrubbed. They arrested family members of known Ember Line fighters, human and Aari alike. I watched a mother cry on a hidden feed as her son was dragged away, accused of dreaming dangerous things. So we hit back. Harder. Not with bombs, with proof. We intercepted Union AI logs, archived drone cam footage of them executing civilians during a security purge on the mining world Tevrin Kesh. We leaked it under a dozen proxy accounts, flooding every corner of the galaxy. And this time, it didn't vanish. Too many were watching now. Too many remembered what we'd already shown them. Corin coordinated a full decryption ring out of Echo Rift. She worked with ex-syndicate slicers, rogue planetary AIs, and one brilliant, half-feral child who only went by Grit. They uncovered entire lines of hidden Union legislation, code-speak laws that allowed the legal extermination of non-conforming species in cases of extended cultural resistance. They had written the Aari's death into law, and we showed it to everyone. The fallout came fast. 4 Union Council members resigned. 2 disappeared. A vote was called to remove Chancellor Hereth from emergency wartime powers. She responded by initiating Directive 19, planetary lockdowns, military curfews, forced conscription across 69 systems. That was when the galaxy cracked open. Rallies turned into riots. Riots turned into revolts. Not just us, everyone. Factory workers, ex-soldiers, shuttle pilots, smugglers, even corporate execs who'd stayed quiet for profit started donating materials, ships, codes. They weren't doing it for the Aari anymore. They were doing it because the mask had fallen off the Union's face, and underneath was something hollow, greedy, and afraid. Kira and I stood on the deck of an old cargo hauler, now refitted as a mobile war command. He looked out over the data feeds, burning cities, new banners, people chanting for freedom in a dozen languages. "This is not victory," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It's ignition. Too many still bleed." "Too many always will," I said. "But at least now they know why." Corin stepped in, face smudged, one eye bruised. "We've got confirmation. 5 more outer colonies flipped. Union's pulling back cruisers to defend inner systems. They're shrinking." For the first time, I let the idea sink in. The Union might actually fall. Not today, maybe not this year. But someday. Because you can't rule a galaxy if no one believes in you anymore. But even as we spread, even as our cause grew stronger, darker things were stirring. The message was short. They're building something old, something forbidden. Attached was a single image, blurry, corrupted, but the structure was clear enough. A moon-sized facility, shielded, pulsing with energy signatures we'd never seen before. Not military, not communications, not defense. Kira stared at it for a long time before whispering a word that sent a chill down my spine. "Ethergate." "What is it?" I asked. He hesitated. It was once used by ancient civilizations to erase entire regions of space, not destroy, remove, as if they'd never existed. Corin paled. "They're not trying to defeat us," she muttered. "They're trying to undo us." I felt a tremor in my chest. Not fear. Resolve. "They want silence," I said. "Then we'll give them a sound so loud the stars remember." Because this war wasn't about borders anymore. It was about existence, and we had no intention of being forgotten. The Ethergate. That name alone was enough to send our entire network into overdrive. Old legends whispered about it. Dark myths traded between rogue AI, forbidden fragments of scripture from dead worlds, the kind of stories you only hear when history wants to forget something dangerous. But the image we received wasn't a legend. It was real, buried in the shadows of a collapsing star system on the fringe of Union territory. A moon-sized ring structure, not orbiting anything, just hovering in spatial lock. Hidden beneath cloaking fields so ancient, even Union satellites couldn't see it directly, not unless they were already trying to activate it. And now, we had to act. Fast. The Emberline called an emergency summit on Echo Rift. It wasn't just humans and Aari anymore. Our movement had grown. Plaxians, Dren hybrids, even 3 sentient data clusters joined the session. 30 different cells represented, each feeding in via scrambled signal. The tension was thick. "We don't have enough to launch a full assault," Corin said. "Even if we throw everything we have, their defense grid around the Ethergate will rip us apart before we breach the surface." "We're not breaching," I said. "Not like that." I zoomed in on the recovered image. "Look here, ventilation channels. Old tech. This thing was built before modern shielding. If we can get a single infiltration squad inside, we can sabotage it from the core." Kira leaned forward. His eyes glowed with a dim, flickering light. "If they activate it, we won't die. We'll be erased, removed from timelines, memories, records, every species who helped us, every voice that spoke our names. They'll forget us like we were never born." A quiet settled over the room. It wasn't just about winning anymore. This was about being, existing. "You want to send a team into the most heavily guarded structure in Union space," Corin said, rubbing her temples. "With what? 3 ships and a prayer?" "No," I said. 4 ships. And a promise." She looked up. "That if we don't make it," I continued, "the galaxy still remembers what we fought for." The vote wasn't unanimous. But it was enough. The mission was green-lit. We called it Project Revenant, because if they tried to erase us, we'd haunt their history anyway. I handpicked the team. Kira, of course. He knew the stakes better than anyone. Corin. There was no one better with infiltration codes and last-minute miracles. Vance should have been there, but he'd given his life for us long ago. So I took his nameplate, hung it around my neck, and carried him in with me. The others included a Dren tactician named Riv, whose arms split into 6 when needed. A human tech runner called Nilo, who used to be Union security before they purged her family. And a silent Aari warrior named Thai, who hadn't spoken since Elveron burned. We rode out on a ghost ship, an old mining freighter retrofitted with cloaking fields and distortion nodes. Ugly, slow, and invisible to all but direct scans. Perfect. The journey took us through 2 quarantine zones and 1 dead system. Union patrols were thick, paranoid, but they weren't looking for us yet. Until we reached the shadow edge of the collapsed star system. And there it was. The Ethergate. Massive, ancient, and somehow alive. You don't understand scale until you see something the size of a moon humming with forgotten technology, its energy pulses echoing through space like a heartbeat. The closer we got, the harder it was to breathe. Not because of pressure, but presence. As if the very fabric of space knew what this thing could do. Kira stood beside me in silence, his hands clasped in a prayer I couldn't understand. "They shouldn't have touched this," he whispered. "Not even the first ones dared to use it." "But the Union will," I said. "Because they don't fear consequences, just witnesses." We split into 2 squads. Mine would breach the lower vents, plant the charge, and override the core logic. Corin's would ascend through a service duct and reach the primary control hub, where the Union was prepping activation. Nilo synced our clocks. "You'll have 11 minutes after breach. After that, the failsafe kicks in and the outer shields fry anything inside." I nodded. Plenty of time. It was a lie. No mission ever has plenty of time. We launched. Our ship drifted toward the outer vent, masked in heat signatures that mimicked stray debris. The Union's sensors didn't blink. Until we were already inside. The moment we breached, everything turned red. Klaxons, auto turrets, motion sensors screaming, but we moved like ghosts. Silent, fast, focused. Kira disabled the turrets with soft pulses of light that bent the circuitry before it could fire. They carved through doors with ancient plasma blades passed down by his ancestors. I watched Nilo dive into hardpoints like she'd been born in the wires. We reached the central access chamber in 8 minutes. 3 left. The core was beyond a sealed barrier, and in front of it stood 2 Union paladins, genetically enhanced, armored like war gods, with blades that burned blue and eyes that saw through most lies. But not through courage. We hit them fast. I took a blade to the shoulder, nearly lost my arm. Kira was thrown across the room. Nilo took a blast full to the chest. Her armor stopped it, barely. In the end, it was Thay who finished it. He didn't speak. He just moved. Aari style wasn't built for war, but for harmony. But harmony in the hands of the broken becomes something brutal. He dropped them both in 6 seconds, then collapsed. We didn't have time to mourn. We dragged the bodies aside, cracked the seal, and stared into the heart of the Ethergate. It wasn't a machine, it was a memory. The energy pulsed in patterns like thought. It felt alive. Nilo patched the core. Charge set. 2 minutes. If we don't override, this whole thing implodes, and us with it. I stepped to the console. The language was old. Pre-Union. Pre-history. But the Aari glyphs matched. Kira helped me read them. Override wasn't simple. It wasn't a code. It was a decision. The system asked one question, repeated in dozens of dialects. Do you consent to be remembered? I stared at the screen. Then I pressed yes. The pulse surged. Corin's voice crackled through. We're in the control hub. Uploading virus now. You're clear. Get out. We ran. Back through the corridor, ducking sparks and alarms, half carrying Kira, whose leg was shattered by shrapnel. We reached the exit, climbed into the pod, and launched. The Ethergate didn't explode. It collapsed. Silently. Power faded. Shields died. Its pulse flickered, slowed, and finally stopped. Behind us, in the distance, Union cruisers turned. But we were already gone. The galaxy remained. And so did we. The Ethergate was dead. That monstrous relic, capable of erasing civilizations from history, was now nothing more than a floating tomb of silence. And in its stillness, the stars began to remember. We thought the war would end there. It didn't. The Union didn't crumble overnight. Empires rarely do. They bend, scream, claw their way through death like wounded beasts. But the blow we dealt them was one they couldn't hide. Not anymore. The collapse of the Ethergate wasn't just a tactical loss. It was a cosmic disgrace. Worlds that once whispered now shouted. Colonies that once obeyed now resisted. Even the core systems, places so deeply tied to Union control that rebellion had seemed laughable, began to fracture. Small at first, then louder. Massive corporations started breaking away. Data hubs refused surveillance pings. Local governors declared neutrality. The Union's response? Tighter grip. Sharper threats, raids without reason, and every single time, another cell of the Ember Line emerged in response. It wasn't just humans anymore. It wasn't even just Aari. The galaxy itself had begun to rise. Kira and I returned to Echo Rift a week after the collapse. The station was fuller than ever, ships docking from every system, carrying supplies, stories, and names of the fallen. The walls were covered in symbols, each marking a world that had joined the cause. 47 when we left, 86 when we came back, and growing. Corin met us at the landing pad. Her left arm was in a sling, eyes tired but still burning. You made it, she said, pulling me into a tight hug. I thought you were atomized. You think that every time, I said. Yeah, she smirked, and one of these days I'll be right. We held a council that night, the largest yet. Kira stood in the center of the room, limping, eyes pale but steady. He wore the old robes of his ancestors, cleaned, repaired, and now glowing faintly with woven light. He didn't speak for long. Just enough. "I once thought survival was enough," he said. "But you, all of you, reminded me that living in truth matters more than merely existing. The Union tried to forget us. You reminded the galaxy that memory is resistance." A low murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. I stepped forward next. I wasn't dressed for war anymore. No armor, no rifle. Just the plate around my neck, Vance's name, and the stories burned behind my eyes. Every empire thinks it can outlive truth. Every tyrant thinks fear will last longer than justice. But now they know better. Because we didn't fight them with fleets. We fought them with witnesses. With every child who saw our broadcasts. Every worker who passed a message. Every voice that whispered our names when it wasn't safe. I paused, then lifted the data chip Nilo recovered from the Ethergate's core. "This is the last piece of them," I said. "The final logs of what the Union tried to erase, and now we release it. All of it. No encryption. No hiding. Every memory they tried to destroy, restored. To every star, every screen." We uploaded it live. Within hours, the galaxy erupted again. This time not in fear, not in protest, but in honor. Shrines went up on dozens of worlds, dedicated not to humans or Aari or the Ember Line, but to the forgotten. Names that never made it into the Union's records, villages burned, cultures erased, heroes unnamed. They had names now. The Aari called this day Kirin Thay, the day of breath given back. Korin just called it what it was. Victory. Not the kind you shout about, not the kind you raise a flag for, but the quiet kind, the lasting kind. Of course, the Union wasn't done. They still had power, ships, soldiers. But something had changed. The fear was gone, not from them, from us. And when people lose fear, empires lose wars. Over the next year, we saw system after system declare independence. Some called themselves free republics, others formed pacts. One group, made of humans, Aari, and 6 other species, called themselves the Second Accord. Their first law? No being may be forgotten by force. That line alone made the war worth it. Kira returned to his people, not as a priest, not as a warrior, but as a teacher. He built learning centers on reclaimed Aari lands, places where their songs and sciences were passed down again. Places where memory, once a weapon, became a legacy. Korin went deeper into the rim, still fighting, still slicing, still surviving. She said the fire wasn't out yet. She wasn't wrong. As for me, I left Echo Rift one last time. No ceremony, no goodbye speech. Just a quiet launch from Dock 7. I didn't need to stay. The Ember Line had grown beyond me. They didn't need a soldier. They needed a storyteller. So that's what I became. I carried Vance's nameplate with me, Barrett's too. Duro, Cole, Nilo, and Thay, who never spoke a word, but said everything through his final breath. Every world I visit, I tell their stories. Not to glorify, not to recruit, just so they're heard. Because that's what the Union hated most. Not weapons, not rebellion, remembrance. They feared the sound of names said out loud, of truths spoken when silence was expected. They wanted to erase. We wanted to endure, and in the end, we did. So now, when people ask me what happened, why the galaxy changed, I tell them this. It wasn't about war. It wasn't about politics. It was about one simple choice. That when the stars turned cold, When the powers turned away, humanity rose, not to save themselves, but to protect those no one else would. And in doing so, they saved everything.